This budget speech was illuminated by BrightRock, the first ever needs-matched life insurance that changes as your life changes.
Good afternoon. Here it is, 1st of November. Can you believe it? 2 months to the end of the year. My colleague Stuart Lohman and I are with you for our second webinar on the second day. It's not often. I mean, back-to-back webinars. But today is a very special one. Twice a year, I get to go into lockup at Parliament and really take a deep dive into what government is doing with all our tax money. It's to understand what the government finances are about, and that's what we're here for today. Thanks to our continued and long and valued sponsorship from BrightRock. Thanks, Suzanne and Skulk and the guys. We feel really close to you, and we really appreciate the way that you continue to support us in bringing our community and the whole of South Africa, I guess, insights into what's actually happening with that 1/3 of the economy that we keep funding through our taxes. But before we get into the webinar this evening, Stuart, as always, is going to keep us organized as far as the tech is concerned.
Excellent. Thanks, Alec. If for those can see my face and Alec's face on screen, there's a nice presentation in the background. If you can hear my voice coming through, can you please raise your hand? There's a little hand. It literally says raise hand on the bottom of your screen. There we go. I've got them flying through, Alec. That's excellent. We also like to keep it conversational. Alec will run through the presentation, but there's a Q&A sort of button on that same control panel. If you can put your questions in there, and as they come through, I'll pop them through Alec. But yeah, Alec, get context no more. So
don't you? I just love that. Get context no more. That's what BizNews is all about, and I'm here to give you context. So let me just give you a little bit of background. I was up this morning at 5, or just before 5, to get ready, shaved, and arrived at Parliament at about 10 to 6. Found my way through its catacombs there to the meeting room on the far side on the 5th floor in one of those buildings. And that was where it was set up by bright-eyed and bushy-tailed Department of Finance / Treasury staffers who've been there since Friday. And then they gave us documents, big fat documents of that they'd been had printed and checked. I don't know who has the job of checking these thousands of words of documentation, but it's all been checked, and I still haven't found a mistake yet in the budget documents. And then you start diving into it, and you start reading exactly what has been going on. And my overall feeling about this year's budget, this year's mini budget, remember, this is what they call it, they hate us to call it the mini budget. It's called the medium-term budget presentation speech. And that's the one that the finance minister gives halfway through the February budgets every year. He gave that speech today, and it really was a bit of a watershed, this one. There's a lot that we can talk about later, and we'll get into some of the deep diving, but I call it the growing up budget. And why? Because as I was coming out, as it happens, there's a press conference at 11:30 in the lockup. So you get into lockup at 6 a.m. and you're actually allowed to leave lockup at 2 o'clock. You can get busy writing, and then you send through the content at 1 o'clock, and then the team at BizNews puts it onto the site, and then once the minister starts speaking, then you're allowed to release the news, which means that the guy who's in the lockup is pretty busy. And so I was today, and coming out of that press conference, which goes on for about an hour from 11:30 to 12:30, it's always really useful to go and listen there. I happened to come out at the same time that the finance minister came out from the podium side, and we shook hands. We've met each other a few times now here in Davos, elsewhere, and he said to me, "So what do you think?" And my immediate reaction was, under the circumstances, not bad. And I thought about it a bit more, and I didn't say this to him, but to me it occurred, that it would be called for me the growing up budget. Remember, Stu, 6 months ago, it was the Eskom budget. Everything was about Eskom. We were spending so much money on Eskom. A year ago, it was the bailout budget. They were bailing out Denel, Eskom, Transnet, SABC, you name it, Sanrail.
Yeah.
There was huge amounts of bailouts. No bailouts in this budget. Was nothing announced yet anyway. But it was growing up, because you could have gone one of two ways. You could have gone the way, or we could have heard them say, well, you know, we're going to continue with the SOEs and we want this developmental state and we are going to double down on it and we're going to prove to you that socialism works and central control works. Or it could go, we're going to give you competition. We're going to bring the private sector to the party. We are going to fix this place, not by fixing Eskom, but by fixing electricity supply. Not by fixing Transnet, but by fixing the logistics of the country. Suddenly, it's like a big light bulb went on. And sure, there's a babelas now after all those bailouts. We've got a bad financial situation. I'm going to take you through all of that. But what left me feeling uplifted for the first time since 2008, it's a heck of a long time.
Yeah.
First time since the Trevor Manuel era, when we were running budget surpluses. And remember, we're still running a deficit here. Oh, well, it's about 20% of what we spending. Of what we're spending is over and above what we're getting in. Yeah. It's big stuff. I mean, these are big numbers. But they love to talk about this primary surplus, which means if you take out the interest, it's like saying to a guy who's got a home loan, don't pay your home loan, and then as long as you balance the books everywhere else. And as you know, every month, if you're not paying your home loan, that interest just gets put onto the capital, and it grows and it grows and it grows damn fast. Well, that's what South Africa's been doing for 15 years. It's not only not being repaying the interest, but it's actually been spending more of the rest than it's been getting in. We've been going down at a rapid rate because of this real just stupidity, really, and this madness about we can have a developmental state. We can do it better. We don't need competition. We can have a monopoly over the two key parts of this economy, electricity and logistics. Yep. And now it's over. And that's a big thing. That's a huge thing. I don't know if it's got anything to do with the election next year. There was a question to Enoch Godongwana, who's like hard-boiled in the ANC. He's got lots of contacts, lots of connections. He's a man who counts in that organization. And his question was, are you guys now doing things differently because you might be in a minority government next year? His response was, the ANC has always gone into an election going with less than 50%, which I think is complete nonsense. I've never heard of them going into election with a supposed under 50% before, but that's what he said. So perhaps internally they G each other up by saying that. And he said, whoever makes a government, they're going to have the ANC in it. And actually, it's probably going to be the ANC making the government. So we're still going to be in government, is what he had to say. So if he's right, then it's very important on how they're thinking. And how they're thinking is growing up. It's like the young democracy is finally starting to come of age. Up to now, it was like a teenager. You know, you keep spending because somebody's going to bail you out. It doesn't matter how much more you spend than what you get in, because there's mom and dad around. Well, clearly South Africa has got mom and dad in the international markets, but these mom and dads, they want their money back, and they want you to charge you high interest rates, and they've been increasing those interest rates. So that's really the story of this budget. What were the finance department, treasury, the Ramaphosa government, what were they going to do? Were they going to double down on socialism, or were they going to say, game's up, let's bring the private sector in? They did the latter. And that's really the big story here. Let's start with Transnet. I really liked what I heard from Enoch Godongwana about Transnet. not because Transnet is going to be an easy game. Sorry, there was something else very interesting as we started in the press conference today. Godongwana did not give the opening summary. He gave that to David Masondo, who's a much younger Deputy Finance Minister who has been around a few times. I'm not sure how many of these events he's been at, but he's always been pretty quiet, or a bit of where he has spoken, he's spoken more from an ANC Youth League kind of approach. It hasn't been a mature, sober, I actually understand what I'm talking about on economics and finance person. But today he spoke, it was like Godongwana said, okay, here's the young guy in the party, tell the mature story, tell the growing up young democracy story. And he did. And he spoke about competition. Transnet needs competition. Eskom needs competition. Competition is good. Now remember, this is coming from a political party who had monopolies and hated anyone to even consider that they could compete on producing electricity or logistics, rail. Suddenly, competition is good. And that was taken one step further when there was an almost antagonistic attitude between Treasury and Transnet. The feeling I got was that Transnet is trying to twist Treasury's arm, give us money. And Treasury has said, no, we're not giving you money. We're not going to do what we've done for the last 15 years, where a parastatal has come to the center and said, we want money. And the parastatal had said, well, we don't really want to give it to you. And the Treasury had said, we don't really want to give it to you. And the parastatal had said, well, if you don't give us, no more service. Oh, well, okay, so we have to give you the money. In this case, it's a very different ballgame. So Transnet has come to Treasury. Godongwana told us that Transnet's not getting 1 cent.
Sure.
On top of which, they have got a redemption of debt coming next week. So I don't know how that's all going to work out. He said, we will negotiate with Transnet how we are going to go forward with whatever bailout or support we give them. And there will be very strict conditions. Conditionality, remember that word. Later in the conversation, he spoke about Eskom. And he said, Eskom initially, if you recall last year, got 254 billion rands worth of bailout. I mean, these numbers are just eye-watering. It's 500 billion that taxpayers have given to Eskom so far. 500 billion. Like you could have built a whole new Eskom pretty much. This 254 billion, a lot of it was interest-free loan. But suddenly, Treasury is saying, no, it's not going to be interest-free anymore. They're going to be conditions. And if you do not meet those conditions, we will not convert that interest-free loan into equity, which being the only shareholder means you write it off. We will charge you interest on it. In other words, there's a bit of a big stick there. Never before was this implemented. And certainly Transnet must have thought, as they did a year ago, oh, we just rock up at Treasury. We need 8 billion. We got to keep the rails going. This time around, Treasury said no. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation going forward. The cornerstone of the engagement between Treasury and Transnet, because that's the one we really, the fresh stuff that came out today really, is going to be a route map. And the route map is going to be about competition. So we're moving into a completely different era. It's almost like up to now, Transnet has been making its own rules. We've heard from business that Portia Derby was incredibly arrogant whenever she engaged with Melanie Vaness, and she said that to us in our interview and on more than one occasion, that it was almost like Transnet didn't listen, and when they did make a point of suggesting they listened, they never listened either. But now that's all going out of the window. Transnet is not going to be the rail monopoly in South Africa anymore. Why? Because central government has said they cost us 411 billion rand last year. Transnet cost South Africa, according to Treasury, 411 billion rand last year. Sure. Now you start working out what the taxes would have been on that and what the difference would have been to this economy, which now, over the last 10 years, has grown slower than the population growth and is going to continue to grow slower, according to Treasury, until 2026. These are bad numbers. It's almost like, at some point in time, you hit rock bottom. We've hit rock bottom now. That's what the feeling I got out of all of this. The other part was on overspending. I mean, I could go on all day about, all night, well, I'm not going to, but you know what I'm talking about, on the overspending part of the South African government. Treasury is not happy about the 350 Rand a month social grant. The politicians want it. And if Treasury, at the moment, listens to the politicians, there can be no way that the ANC, going into an election, is going to remove that 350 Rand a month grant for 7.2 million people. That's lots and lots of money, billions and billions of rands. There's no way that they're going to remove that, because they would clearly lose too many votes, and they need every vote they can get at the moment, given the other mess-ups that have been going on. As a consequence of that, Treasury has been told, we don't care what you think, you're just going to just budget for it, provide for it. Treasury's response to all of that has been, but how are we going to fund it? We need something, increase taxes somewhere so that we can fund it. But there's no capacity to increase taxes. So as a result of that, it's one of those things hanging in abeyance. It's going to be debt. It's gone straight onto the debt, onto the bottom line. And the reason for that is the debt to GDP. So in other words, the deficit. So what happens in economics, in a government, is that the ideal situation is you get income that is offset by expenditure, and it's 100%, both sides. What happens in South Africa is income is lower than expenditure by quite a quantum. That difference between income and expenditure is called the budget deficit. What's the percentage of gross domestic product? And in this case, we were targeting 4% in this country. But because of the social grant and the overspending on the second point, which was by the wage negotiations, which, government caved, as it always does. That added 27 billion wage negotiations. Then there's another 57 billion less in revenue. Now, these are big numbers. So let's just start from the beginning. Treasury had to find money for the social grant. It kind of found it. It was in that 4% budget deficit. I say kind of found it. It was going to be borrowed anyway. So what we're doing now is we're borrowing as a nation for our children's payment money so that the ANC can get more votes, because it's given people a 350 Rand social grant, COVID-related. COVID's over, but it's too scared to remove that grant because we'll lose votes. That's the truth. Now, if all of South Africa knew that, all of South Africa, barring the 7 million people who are getting a 350 Rand a month, would surely be marching to Pretoria and saying, why are you labeling my children with your debt because you can get more votes in the 2024 election? But sadly, not everybody understands business and economics, and that's something that is our challenge. We need to keep explaining to people. But that's already in the budget deficit. Now the budget deficit's gone up because why? Company taxes are down. Why? The commodity cycle has turned. Revenues are down 57 billion, primarily company taxes, and they've added the wage increase of another 27 billion. However, and here's where the little bit of hope comes through. Godongwana is taking 21 billion Rand off the base costs of the budget in the various departments that he's already given it. So he's already given that in February. Now he's going to remove it. because he has to. It doesn't offset everything, but at least it takes some of it away, maybe a quarter of it away. And now we've got a deficit that is added to where we were in February of 63 billion rand. And that takes the budget deficit to 4.9% of GDP, which is up from 4%. So the international markets are international investors are going to say, well, look, I wasn't really keen on getting South African bonds anyway. I want even more now because it's 4.9%, which means our interest bill gets even higher. I mean, it's a vicious circle. I just want to take you through the elephant in the room. And these are a couple of things that came out in today's documentation, which I thought is well worth sharing. Our government wage bill on the left-hand side, that left-hand side image, as a percentage of our economy, in other words, a percentage of GDP, is right up there with Denmark and Iceland and Brazil, which is one of the most socialist countries in the world. It's got its own issues. Belgium, Spain, Norway, there you can see it, and 30% above the average for developed countries. But then you have a look at what we get for it, and there's a big question mark. For obvious reasons, South Africa should be nowhere near that. We should be more like 8 to 9%, where China, India, Mexico are. They're much more our peer group. Why has this happened? Well, look at that image on the right-hand side. Now, this is a really, really good one. The red line is for the low-paid workers who work for government. And as you can see, that number, unit cost as it is, there were about 1 million people who worked for government in 2014. They're in that area. It's basically unskilled. That's down to 400,000. These are treasury figures. I'm not making this up. So there's like 1 million people who were employed by government down to 400,000. 600,000 jobs have gone for unskilled workers. However, the other side of the scale, where people get more money, the first one is between 350 and 600,000. What's that? Between, say, 30,000 and 50,000 rand a month. That's a well-paid worker. That's gone up from 182,000 to 324,000 to 477,000 to 595,000 in those 4 periods. So the last 10 years, it's gone from 182 to 600. It's basically trebled. But it gets even better when you look at the guys who earn between 50,000 and nearly 90,000 rand a month, nearly 1 million rand a year. That's gone from 44 to 86 to 139 to 180. And the fat cats, the millionaires, the public servants who earn more than 1 million rand today, there are 55,000 of them. And just stop for a minute. There are 55,000 public servants who earn more than 1 million rand a year, up from 10,000 10 years ago. So you can see what's happened. As the trade unions have got more and more powerful, they haven't worried about the little people. They've worried about themselves, the fat cats. And so we've got this situation where the public service has reduced its effectiveness because there are more and more chiefs and very few Indians. We are paying as a nation what the Danes and the Icelandics are paying as a percentage of our economy. But we have 55,000 people who work for the state who earn more than 1 million rand a year, remembering that 1 million rand that they're taking home, and that's more than 1 million, it's base rate of 1 million, is all paid for by our taxes, by the taxes of the 2/3 of society who don't work for the state. And that's the elephant in the room. So now how do you address that? I remember in this Latitude Hotel, I interviewed John Steenhuisen. It's well worth looking at that one again. I said, John, just imagining for a moment that you are the next government. What is your biggest challenge? He said, the public service. The biggest challenge is taking the half of our taxes, more than half of our taxes actually, that go in to pay these people, because that's the situation we've we find ourselves in. Why? Because Jacob Zuma did not understand economics and actually didn't care. To him, he was having the time of his life, signing, well, I mean, he was stealing anyway, so you had that on the one side, but on the other side, you want a job, you're my family, what a question. There we go. Why not, little while you'll be earning R1 million. How effective these people are is being seen in the way that the public service deliveries are. So that's the elephant in the room. And I go into this, we the funders. You talk about we the people. Well, we the funders in this case. And that 56 billion rand hole that has now suddenly emerged has to be paid for by we the funders. Where does it come from? If you look at those two red marks there, company tax we spoke about before, down by 36%. But another big one is VAT. VAT is down a quarter on what was estimated just as recently as February. Now, what's going on there? They say, and Edward Kiswetter was there today, the story is that there have been many VAT refunds demanded. But when do companies demand VAT refunds? They demand them when they're under cash flow pressure. And there's a storm brewing there. The biggest storm, of course, is that 37% of all tax is personal income tax. And for a minute when I was looking at the numbers, I thought, here's an interesting thing. The poor old private income tax people, us, we the guys who do our PAYE, we're carrying the can more and more. Well, of course we are. We carry the biggest can, 650 billion rand from private income tax. And that is from every salary employed all the way through the society. But this is about stable. It's 37, 36, 37, 38%. That's where we've been in the most recent years. The difference here is that VAT and company tax have gone down. But it's an interesting number to look at. VAT 15%, 445 billion. So it gives you a good indication of how much each 1 percentage point of VAT actually earns the country. If you add another 5% to that, it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to add another 25% or another 15, go from 15 to 20, that suddenly you're going to get another 25% in VAT. It doesn't always work like that, because if you add more VAT, first of all, you get the unions who are going to actually go out and strike. And secondly, people spend less. They just do, at least initially. It's like electricity. People are spending less on electricity. It's too damn expensive at the moment for many. So here's the context. Get context, no more. There's our budget deficit. As you can see there, the record deficit was 7.1%. Down is bad, up is good. Down is bad, up is good. So the record deficit was just before democracy in 1993. I've gone all the way back to 1970 here. The best performance was when Trevor Manuel was around, and there 2007, 2008, he delivered budget surpluses. That's such a good place to be. And I'll show you why in just a moment. And where we are now, we've been running deficits now of 4% plus, basically since Zuma came into power. And then, of course, you had that huge one during COVID-19. So the budget deficit, we're not in a good place on the budget deficit, but it could be worse. But here's where we're in a bad place. Have a look at that. Have a look at that. You can see that the government debt is now projected to get to 77.7%. Now, remember, this is after there was a rebasing of the economy a couple of years ago. So what they did was they said, the economy is actually much bigger than we think it is. So let's rebase the economy. So obviously your debt stays what it is. Now you've got the denominator, which is suddenly much bigger. So instead of being at 100% debt to GDP ratio, because your economy is bigger, 77. But let me tell you, 77, that is scary times. Scary times. Because where we are on that one is this what this debt actually means. Trevor Manuel, R8.80 in every 100 Rand was used to pay funders. R8.80. Today, we're at 20 Rand and 70 cents. Now just think of that. For every 1 Rand in tax that is being drawn into the country, we used to pay R8.80 in interest. We now pay 20 Rand and 70 cents. So 1/5 as against under 1/10, which means that there is a lot less money to go around for education, police, even public servants, which you've heard I'm pretty critical about what's happened there, and I don't think anybody cannot be seeing the numbers. And that is where the real problem is for South Africa. You've got an overstaffed public sector, overpaid, maybe not that overstaffed, but certainly hectically overpaid, as you can see what's happened in the past few years. Good luck for the unions, but unfortunately, the more successful the unions are, the more trouble they make for everybody else, the more of a problem they are for everyone else. Because if the union is getting a bigger increase for their people than those who are funding it, i.e. taxpayers are going backwards at a rate of knots. People who work for the state because of their strong unions are going forward at a rate of knots. I mean, there used to be a time when the best place to have a job was in the financial services sector. It appears in South Africa, the best place to have a job is in the government sector, which is great because you never get fired and you go home at 4 o'clock. So, but here's the debt service relief, the debt service issue. And this is the other dirty picture that we really need to apply our minds to. Because unless you can get that down, and it's being projected to 22%. Now, why is all of this happening? It's happening because the economy is not growing, primarily. So if your cake is not getting any bigger, then you are going to get all kinds of stresses. It's like my dear friend Des Irwin used to say when he bred horses. He said, you put too many horses in a paddock, you get Hillbrow disease. It's like rats in a cage. Too many people fighting over resources. And that is partly a result in this country of dumb economic policies. The developmental state. We know we want monopolies because we can manage them. Well, you can't. And you've now proved it beyond reasonable doubt. In fact, emphatically. Gorandwana knows it. Ramaphosa knows it. Certainly the people at Treasury know it. And you just got to wonder if they had a different political overlords, or if they had different political overlords, how those guys at Treasury would fly. Because they must have been banging their heads against the wall for so long, seeing what the issues are. But they've got people who aren't, who are forcing them to go in one direction, like this 350 Rand COVID relief grant. It's just, if there's one reason why you must never vote ANC in the 2024 election, just one reason, make that the reason. Because you are labeling the future generations with a social grant, which you could argue for during COVID. You can't argue for it now. It's not possible to argue for it now. That money should be used in growing this economy, in longer term investments. But we're not. We just spend the money and we hope someone's going to take care of tomorrow. It doesn't work like that.
But Alec, wasn't there all that PR around the 350 Rand grant with the new businesses that have been opened and it was being used in an efficient way? But there was only a few of those. And that was used by government when they first introduced the grant, and how individuals were making good use of this. But I agree with you.
Nobody's fooled, Stu. No, people are not stupid. All of us are not stupid.
No.
There are people all over the country. I mean, just talk to Gigi Alcock. He'll tell you the reality of what's happening in the informal sector. If these guys who make these stupid decisions, but they're not stupid, they're very calculated. They know that if we give a gift to someone every month, and the ANC is not here, they're not going to get that gift anymore. So they're probably going to vote for us. And if you're the recipient of the 350 Rand, you probably are. But as Gigi says, the informal sector, you don't find people starving in South Africa. The informal sector is buzzing. It's vibrant. We have amazing people. This is what, if only we could get over our own inferiority complex as a nation, as a people, as a general South African people. We are incredibly good at so many things. Enterprising. Gigi will tell us that you want to get the best kind of entrepreneurs that you'll see on the African continent go into the lower income areas in South Africa. Give those people some capital to grow. Give them an opportunity to take their skills and get bigger and get better and employ more people. That's the kind of thing we should be looking at. Not this nonsense, well, give everyone 350 Rand, and then the bottle stores, boy, do they thrive during that period. Probably the best. I saw it with my own eyes in Mooi River. 80% unemployment. Guys got on with things within the Bruntville, the old township there. They got on. There was lots going on there. But officially, unemployment was 80%. But when the social grants came out, that bottle store, there was a queue around the block in a little town. And that's not the only, that's every town is like that. So let's just sober up, get rid of this damn babelas and get with the program.
But Alec, just on the informal, isn't it? They don't there's a trust issue there as well, because they don't recognize that. Wouldn't that, if you made that a formal economy, the taxes that would come through on that, they obviously wouldn't want the informal economy don't want anyone near it. You keep it separate.
It opens up a whole new area. People are happy to pay taxes if they are moderate and if they're getting something for it. If you are the typical informal business owner, what's your incentive to pay taxes? You're never going to get caught because you actually, royal game anyway. And the problem there is that you get a lot of illegal immigrants who are playing in that game as well, in that market, and they never pay taxes for the same reasons. Nobody's there to catch them because you might get some voters caught up in the pool. We're a young democracy. We need to move to maturity. We're 30 now. We're not kids anymore. We can't blame everybody else for our missteps. We need to start taking responsibility for the issues that we've brought on ourselves. Grey listing is one of those. I did Mr. Momaniat, who's there sitting, this is an old picture, sitting next to the finance minister. I bumped into, I kind of had a quick chat with him outside and asked him how grey listing's going, because he was the acting director general, and now he's I think the deputy, but he's around anyway, and he's handling the whole grey listing story. And his response to that is that we're hoping for early 2025. The finance minister also said there's been progress on it, and there's actually something in his speech which talks about it. But it is really interesting because when South Africa was first grey listed, we were told that it'll only be a few months, stretching into a couple of years already. And now the hope is 2025. So that's not good news on that side, I'm afraid.
You can see all the extra admin ones needed to do anything offshore with it. It's actually quite, it's an expensive exercise.
It's such an expensive exercise. And I tried the other day to open an account with Revolut for my UK business. All fine. Until I said, well, I live in South Africa. No, they're not interested. No. We've got a UK business. You can do it through the no, sorry, you South African resident, not interested. Grey listing has had all kinds of impact on us. On this, I pulled out two old images, which I just thought were relevant for the business community, just to have a look at this again and remind ourselves how the tax base is so small. So here we've got, remember, 55,000 public servants who are now taking R1 million each, plus, $1 million plus. And you've got only 3.5%. Only 2 million South Africans in total pay virtually all of South Africa's personal income tax. It's scary stuff. In the private sector, in total, there's 270,000 people who earn more than R1 million. In total. Okay. Let's go back to that picture of the government. And as you can see there, so in total, only 270, of which is 235,000. No, that's not correct. Sorry, 55,000 of them are in the public sector. So 270,000 people earn more than R1 million, of which 55,000 are in the public sector. That kind of tells you everything you need to know. And then finally, at the other end of the coin, 18 million of us receive social grants, of which 7 million of those get the COVID grant, which, well, COVID's long gone. So that was it, Stu. It was a very, very interesting day all round. And I found it quite a stimulating period. I'm going to just leave that because that's like the dirty picture. I found it very stimulating as always. It's quite a stretch. It's a bit of a marathon. You're in there at 6 a.m. You want to read as much documentation as you can. The speech this time, it's starting to arrive earlier now. It got to us at about 10:30, which meant that you could actually read the speech before you went in to the press conference from 11:30 to 12:30. So there's a lot packed in to those 6 hours, 8 hours rather. But you leave there knowing a heck of a lot more than you did when you walked in about your country. And I feel, we're in the dwang, but at least for the first time in ages, I can say there's a proper effort. There's a proper mature approach to getting out of it.
Sure. Alec, you mentioned the civil service. So I just got a comment from Trevor, which I think is quite interesting. He says, if you think about the impact of the flow of that higher civil servant pay you mentioned, flowing through to education institutions like the Curros and stuff, and the parent base in private schools is quite high with regards to the high civil percentage terms. So it's just quite an interesting point on who's actually funding these the businesses and what keeps the private schools going actually, and what impact that could have on sort of businesses if you did take it away.
Well, okay, let's assume for a minute that those people earning R1 million in the public sector are worth the R1 million, and that they could go into the private sector and earn R1 million. Just take that as a fantasy. Then imagine the wealth they would generate from earning R1 million in the private sector, or would have to generate to be able to be paid that, and the taxes that would generate. So it's the wrong kind of approach. It's a little bit like the motor vehicle industry. We are subsidizing motor vehicles in this country, but we're doubling down on that. And in today's budget speech, there was an announcement that South Africa is going to subsidize the motor manufacturers to produce electric cars. We're going to help them to go from internal combustion engines, which we have at the moment, because they're being phased out all over the world, and then to move across to electric cars. And Treasury has had discussions with all 7 of the motor manufacturers. And one of the journalists there asked the finance minister, but why don't you give a subsidy to consumers so that they can buy electric cars? He said, no, that would be the wrong thing to do, because then they would stimulate imports. So Tesla would then send imports to this country, and then we would buy the imports if there was a subsidy. So you can understand that. But the whole idea of keeping a motor manufacturing industry going in South Africa with taxpayers' money that's one thing any new government should look at very, very carefully. Because although, and it's a little bit like that point that you made earlier about, well, Curro being kept going by the R1 million public servant, or through the contribution from their children, fair enough. But what is the return on investment that taxpayers are getting from that? And what is the return on investment that taxpayers are getting from the motor industry now, and indeed will be getting from producing electric cars in a country that is far away from any market for electric cars? You've got to bring the stuff here, you've got to make them here, send the cars away. It'll all be for export. Is this the right place to be building electric cars? Maybe we've got cobalt and nickel and copper and the kind of products or beneficiated products that electric cars need. Maybe. But those are big questions to be asked. Somehow I doubt it.
What wasn't the subsidy a big driver behind Tesla? And I mean, no, it's a different market.
Absolutely. That's how Tesla got going. I think they if I remember, until fairly recently, there was a $7,500 subsidy for anyone who bought an electric Tesla. And that kept Elon Musk, that got him through the hump. And now Tesla is making gazillions for the American fiscus. I get that. But are these 7 motor manufacturers who are foreign owned going to be making gazillions for the South African fiscus? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. It's one of those too tough to calls, but it is something that really, really needs to be investigated. So we've got questions. Yeah. If anybody, we've got a few minutes left. Please just tap in those questions, Astrid.
Anonymous just wants to know, do the proposals you mentioned still need cabinet approval?
Which proposals are we talking about there?
Just do the proposals.
No, I'll tell you what happens is that the cabinet does approve the budget before the budget is read. So Enoch's not going to come into Parliament and provide a whole budget speech and then have to go back to cabinet to ask. This is all approved by the cabinet. In fact, it's very, very important that as a finance minister, you have got a good relationship with the president. Because if the president doesn't like what you're saying, you can be pretty sure that it's not going to happen. On the other hand, if you don't like what the president's saying, and I think social grants is an example of this, well, that's tough. Because the president has other decisions that will weigh on, or other issues that will weigh on his decisions. And when it comes to that social grant, the president has said, we're getting it, we're keeping it until 2025. So now what'll be interesting if there's a new government after 2024, they're going to have to tackle that thorny issue in the budget of 2025 because it's 35 billion rand that's involved. It's big numbers. Big numbers can make a big difference to all kinds of things, and certainly pay a lot of interest, or please, even better, start repaying debt.
Trevor, just on the point of education, your response is the return on investment is a significant number of better educated learners coming through the system, and he sees it as a positive investment contribution. Just a nice answer there.
Not a bad, I like what you're saying there, and I do believe that that is a very, very important issue. But remember that you can get that return on investment better. You get a higher return on investment than channeling the money through the public sector to a public servant who may or may not be giving you value for money. We hear continuously from Treasury that we need better value for money from the money we spend on employees in the state sector, employees in the state-owned enterprises. Eskom, their payment, the average, we've seen the numbers. The average there is much higher than what the average public sector earns. It's like over 100,000 rand a month. An average is what the people get paid. It's huge, huge, huge numbers. And are we getting value for money because the trade unions have been that good? Probably not. And when you've got this situation, you've got trade unions on the one side who are part of the government. They're only interested in the people they represent, actually. So they're going to argue for them. They're going to increase, and they have for years and years and years, higher than inflation. And now we've got to a ridiculous situation where 55,000 people who work for the state are earning more than R1 million a year.
Oratili wants to ask, did the minister speak about medical aid credits and NHI?
Interesting point. Nothing on medical aid credits. There was a question on NHI, which was ducked.
Okay.
And I say that because it was asked twice, and it was not answered. So if NHI was front and center, burning thing, let's do it, let's get it done, you would have anticipated that if somebody throws a little bone out there, that it would have been picked up by the politicians. I remember at one of the budget press conferences, a little bone was thrown out around Steinhoff, but just kind of obliquely. And Lesetja Kganyago grabbed it and went into this tirade about how they're going to put Jooste in jail and there's a huge task force on it and so on. He was looking for that opportunity. NHI was asked, that question was asked twice, and there was no answer. So I think you can make up your own or draw your own conclusions from that.
Charlene just wants to know, do you have a breakdown of the age bands of the top taxpayers earning above R1 million, or does that not come into the?
They don't give that to us. They don't. There's nothing like that. But it's a good, yeah. You know, we take what we can get from Treasury. This is what they do give us, and this was, by the way, the reason I repeated it. It was not in the documentation today. So it's kind of embarrassing, I think, for Treasury, that the shrinking tax base, this was, look at that, 2021. So it's a problem for the country. If you've got fewer and fewer people who are earning lots and lots of money in the private sector, I'm not talking about the government, because they clearly, those guys, you know, they're not going anywhere. But these are the people who emigrate, the people at the top of the scale.
Yeah.
Or they just decide, I'm not going to work anymore. Why do I need to work? Why must I give away half of what I'm earning to a government who gives me nothing back? I'll stop working, or I'll go and live somewhere else. Those are the issues. Those are the real problems that you have. And as I say, this perhaps it's only something that they distribute in February, but it's usually in the documentation.
Wayne just wants to ask, with the limited and if not declining tax base, government debt to GDP at concerning levels, is there not a risk of sovereign bond default somewhere down the line?
There's a risk of anything, Wayne. There's a risk of absolutely anything in this country. But on the upside, eyes have now been opened. Let's just look on the upside for a minute. We have labored under a government that thought, because it has changed its mind, thought that it could control everything. It could control electricity through Eskom, which it made an absolute mess of. And so we've had load shedding for how long now? 15 years? Just continues. It's getting a little bit better now. There was some good news on load shedding, primarily because the private sector is coming to the party. There's 11,000 megawatts. 11,000 megawatts that is coming in from the private sector that has been approved by NERSA. Well, I guess registered with NERSA. You don't have to approve it anymore. You can produce as much electricity as you like. But it's only 2 years ago that the private sector was not allowed to produce electricity. Now, 11,000 megawatts is 11 stages of load shedding. So what does that tell you? When that comes on stream, 2025, 2026, all of it, I think we're at the moment at about 4,000.
Yeah.
We're going to be at 8,000 in a year's time, and then 11,000 the year thereafter. Suddenly, there's going to be a lot of electricity to go around in South Africa. Eskom is also starting to come back, as Jan Oberholzer from Eskom, the COO, told us on a couple of occasions. They did a lot of work, he and De Ruyter, on fixing up, getting the maintenance schedules together. I mean, there's big problems, as we know, with the coal mafia, but at least you haven't got the Guptas who are giving you rocks to put into your turbines. You're getting some kind of a coal. So that's the first part. Imagine you fix that. As that comes in, as that private sector impact comes in, not just fixing it, but actually giving you electricity, which is cheaper than what you would have otherwise had to pay through the monopoly. So that's point one. The other point is, for the last 5 years, Transnet has distributed less freight every year. It's gone down, 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 down for 5 years in a row. They have moved less freight on the rail lines than the year before. I mean, just think of that for a minute.
Yeah.
You've got an open economy, like an economy that more than 50%, actually up to 60% of its business activity is driven by exports or imports. And you have one supplier, a monopoly, which is going to get you to and from the ports, your products. So if you're importing or exporting, you're reliant on Transnet for freight and for their ports. Now imagine you take that disaster, which it has been in the last 5 years, and you improve that. You turn it around as quickly as we're seeing is happening in electricity. Then look at the future that South Africa has 3, 4, 5 years into the future. And you've got a very, very different scenario to the one that we have today. So the ANC has woken up late. Is it too late for voters? We'll see in next year's election. But the point is, it's woken up. The idea, unfortunately, has got a heck of a lot of that idealism and that dogma within the party still. So although, if you like, the people that Zuma hated so much, the clever guys, the smart guys, are now in the ascendancy, and they can see. And today you saw in the presentation, the budget presentation, exactly what line of what direction Gordon Dwana and other people like him with clearly very high intellect are the path they're going on. You see what that's happening. Come 3, 4, 5 years' time, when you get a turnaround for Eskom, a turnaround for Transnet, or not just Transnet. It's, as Gordon Dwana said, our problem was for 15 years, we tried to fix Eskom instead of trying to fix electricity supply. Now we're fixing electricity supply. And he said the problem that we've got with rail and ports is we've been thinking it's a Transnet problem. It's not a Transnet problem. It's a logistics problem. We're going to fix the logistics. Transnet doesn't like it, of course, because it's losing its monopoly and it's going to get competition. Treasury says the only way. And when you hit rock bottom, that is the only way. So imagine that. And you talk about a turnaround, that if that is the way that those people who make the rules with your money are thinking and the way they're deciding, man, I'll buy that. I'll buy a future where 5 years into the future, we're going in that direction. What I'll buy a country where we're going in the right direction, rather than one which for the last 15 years, I've gone to the budget twice a year and walked out of there saying, who are these morons? How can they not see that they are just driving this nation off a cliff? It was an awful, awful circumstance to be in. And it's unfair to call people morons, I know, but it is misguided. When you don't understand money and you don't understand economics and you think that you can do something that everybody else has tried before and it's been a mess, but this time it'll be different. That's what Albert Einstein defined as insanity. And the insanity that's been going on, not from Treasury, because they've been excellent. And they've been telling us time and time again, this is the right thing to do. But the politicians have not been paying attention. I truly believe what I saw today was politicians paying attention.
And I guess in the answer that simple, if you forget the noise, if you move away from it, if you fix power and you fix freight, so those two things, you fix an economy basically.
Well, you go a heck of a long way. And if you start getting, well, you've got an economy that's very broken, that's grown at less than 1% GDP in the last 10 years, where your population's grown to 1.6. So everyone's getting poorer on average. And that's going to continue until 2026. And that frightens me. If you had a different approach to government, and I'm always so cautious with this, because the one thing that is easy to see where government's going wrong is when they're following socialist lines, because it's a disaster everywhere it's been tried. But where you can slip up really badly is by saying, but go quicker. Come on, make it happen. Push it along. Government works at a different speed, at a different pace to the private sector. It just does. If you put in the right blocks and you allow government to go along its speed and to take its time, it will get there. But don't try and push it, because then you start getting the resistance. You start getting the antibodies in the system that are fighting you. But if you just put the right things in place rather than the wrong things, which we've had, things will improve. So that's kind of my theory on all of this. And it makes me hopeful.
Colin speaks about that shift in thinking. He says this budget seems to speak to a move away from the traditional ANC policy about control of all, and could the reflection given to us today reflect a split within the ANC, or a splinter group prepared to challenge the old idealism, the socialist dogma? That's just a comment from
Brilliant. Absolutely. I'm with you, Colin, on that one. And I do think that we cannot underestimate the learning process that's gone on within the liberation movement. In Zimbabwe, the learning process just didn't seem to happen. You had the guys who were stealing and they just keep stealing. And to them, control is important, and they're retaining control. And that's the tragedy of our neighbor. Fantastic people, but my goodness, are they badly governed. In our country, we were in a very similar place with the Zuma administration. And, lots of people knock Cyril. I know we ran a piece by Ivo Vector. He was very angry with Ramaphosa going to the World Cup and grabbing the trophy. But there's a heck of a lot to be grateful about with Cyril Ramaphosa when you step away from it and have a look at how he's quietly changed a lot of thinking within his own party. Quietly. He's one of the few politicians, certainly in that party, who reads a lot and still does. Mm-hmm. So one day, historians are going to look back and they might have a very different view of the role that Ramaphosa played. They might. I mean, I'm not close enough to it to make any judgment, and I don't think one should make judgment, because the world is just far too complex. Mm-hmm. But what we are seeing is definitely a weight, a balance, a bigger balance in the ANC that is realistic and is seeing how the country's been damaged and how it can be fixed, compared with the old Premier League. Remember the Premier League premiers, Ace Magashule and co. And more those people are getting isolated within their own party, and maybe they will go off and start their own their own operations, other EFFs and so on. It's very possible. Who knows what the future will hold? But what makes me hopeful and excited about South Africa is we just showed it again in the World Cup. Our rugby team showed, if we play together, how incredible, how unbeatable we are. We've got Elon Musk sitting in the United States, a Patrick Sonshien sitting in the United States. These are like icons over there. Rudolf Buerta at Sequoia. These are South Africans. They come from this little country here in the southern tip of Africa. And we just are our own worst enemies. And we've been our own worst enemies because we think we know when we don't. And if you can just get those building blocks right, and the private sector, just cool it. Just let government move at government's pace. Don't try and be a Donald Trump and drain the swamp and then get surprised when nothing actually gets done. Because the antibodies in that system are very strong. There's a way. Most people want a better future. Most people want improvements. They want to see growth. They want their country to succeed. They want to be part of the problem, but not everybody works at the same pace. So that's really the big story. Tolerance. I talk like this because I read that 750-page book on Abraham Lincoln, and man, it blew my mind. It blew my mind about that incredible statesman who guided that country through its darkest hour by being calm, tolerant, happy when everybody else around him was like losing their heads, and just didn't make lots of mistakes. A little bit of Lincoln would
Isn't that our biggest challenge, Alec, as BizNews as well, is to filter through the noise and try to find the balance and hold people account, but just because everyone's after that story, the Cyril story, which is it just distracts you from actually what the purpose is for him to be there, as an example, or what it means for him to be. Because if he wasn't there, he would have been the first president not to be at a World Cup. You look at the other side of the story, and yes, there's certain things that come out, but we just need to filter that noise and just let people get on with it.
Yeah, I agree. There's just too much. There's my reading of the media industry is a complete misdirection on what media is actually about nowadays. In that it seems to be a view that clicks are where it's at, in sensationalism, and if I can say something that people are going to want to read because it's holy shit kind of thing. But actually, people want to be informed. Intelligent people just want to be informed. And that's our challenge at BizNews is indeed what you said. Get away from the noise and help people to be informed.
Well, Alec, I see we've gone over time. I heard a little ring on the back there. So I think we can come to it. Thanks as always. I know it's your longest, it's not your longest day, but it is a long day for you. So thanks very much for being in the trenches, as we say, and for all the insight you bring back. I think it's very important, and keep people informed.
It's such a privilege, and it really is. I enjoy it. I enjoy learning, and I learned a heck of a lot more again today, and I'm glad I could share it with our tribe, and look forward to 6 months' time.
Excellent. Thanks, Alec.
This budget speech was illuminated by BrightRock, the first ever needs-matched life insurance that changes as your life changes.